This is the life of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, countries that have a lot of money thanks to oil. And this is how modern Iraq lives, a country with the 5th largest oil reserves in the world. They would find oil here and start producing it before anyone else. For decades, it has been the only commodity the country has sold to the world. But why has Iraq never been able to get really rich from this oil? Why did Iraq get a harsh dictatorship, decades of wars, uprisings, a ruined environment, and devastation instead of wealth? Today, for 10 minutes, I will tell you about the formation of Iraq, what its economy depends on now, how people live in modern Iraq, and most importantly, why the abundance of oil has brought a lot of suffering to the country. Hello! This is the other side of Iraq, which is not covered in any travel guide. Let's go! So, this is modern Iraq. As I said, the country ranks 5th in terms of oil reserves in the world. It has 3 times more black gold than the United States, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. But why have such oil reserves brought so many problems to the country? Let's turn our guidebook back a few pages. The history of these lands is quite extensive. Suffice it to say that it was here that writing, mathematics, and the first ancient schools appeared. In the early 20th century, Iraq was part of the Ottoman Empire. After the end of the First World War and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the lands of modern Iraq were ceded to Britain. At the same time, it is very important to say from which parts modern Iraq was assembled. In the future, this will greatly affect its history. Iraq is made up of the 3 Ottoman provinces of Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra. Kurds live in Mosul, Sunni Arabs live closer to Syria, and Shiites live in the east. At the same time, Shiites and Sunnis are constantly in conflict with each other. This is where the main problem of Iraq is formed: constant ethnic internal strife and constant dependence on external great powers. In 1932, Iraq gained independence, and this is where we will talk about oil. Oil will remain under the control of Britain, America, and France. For this purpose, an Iraq Petroleum Company will be created. It is this company, not the government, that will decide how much oil to produce. Therefore, it is up to foreigners to decide how much currency will remain in the country and how much will go to Iraqi development. But this will not last long. In 1968, there was an uprising in the country, and the Ba'ath Party came to power. They support nationalism and socialism in Iraq, use strict state control, and most importantly, they take control of oil. As a result, high oil revenues contributed to Iraq's prosperity. From the 60s to the 80s, the economy grew by 6 to 8%. And Iraq turned from a poor country into the 2nd richest country after Saudi Arabia. In the 70s, Iraq became a conditional Dubai in terms of money. Oil brings 95% of the country's income. Saddam Hussein, who had long been the head of the security service in Ba'ath, came to power. What do we have now? On the one hand, the economy is prospering, but on the other hand, because of the internal structure, the conflict between the Kurdish north and the Ba'athist south is growing, and Saddam uses the power of his fist to suppress it. Very quickly, he becomes a dictator who is not afraid to use force against his own people. Again, against the backdrop of this state of affairs inside the country, oil is the cause of trouble in Iraq. The fact is that next to Iraq in Iran was the oil-producing region of Khuzestan, and Saddam Hussein decided to take advantage of the fact that Iran had not yet recovered from the revolution inside the country to seize this region. This capture plan was designed to last for 10 days. As a result, instead of a 10-day war, the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, turns out to be an 8-year war. As a result of the war, the oil infrastructure was damaged to the tune of about $60 billion. And inside the country, there was a rise in food prices, unemployment, and a fall in the currency. In general, things were very bad economically after the war with Iran, and something had to be done. And then Iraq decides to accuse the Gulf countries of producing too much oil, which is harming the Iraqi economy. In particular, they accuse Kuwait of horizontal drilling and stealing their Iraqi oil worth $2.4 billion. After these accusations, Iraq attacks Kuwait and captures it in just 6 days. The United States did not like this state of affairs and threatened that if Iraq did not liberate Kuwait, the United States would go to war. But Saddam Hussein believed in himself and was ready to meet with the entire coalition. The famous Operation Desert Storm took about 100 hours. After that, an embargo was imposed on Iraq. They were forbidden to sell oil. Let me remind you that oil is the country's only source of income. That is why the UN offers an oil for food program. What happened to the Iraq economy as a result? This can be seen in the following example. Iraq's GDP in 1990 was $180 billion, and in 1991, it was already $0.41 billion. That is, the economy fell hundreds of times in just 1 year. As a result of the wars, Iraq lost a lot of money, $230 billion in destroyed infrastructure, and another $170 billion due to the trade embargo. Saddam Hussein's method of governance at home and aggressive foreign policy led the country back into decline. Relations between the United States and Iraq became increasingly tense. After the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the United States claimed that Iraq had violated the UN treaty and had begun to deploy weapons of mass destruction. After that, the US military invasion removed Saddam Hussein from power. He is found in a cellar with a suitcase of money worth $750,000. Saddam spends 3 years in solitary confinement, smoking cigars sent to him by his family and watering flowers in the courtyard. He is tried for 3 years and sentenced to death by hanging. In parallel with these events, in May 2003, Paul Bremer, President Bush's special envoy for Iraq, arrives in Iraq. He decided to disband the Iraqi army, which at that time numbered 300,000 people. After that, unemployment in the country rose to 60%. And after the execution of Saddam Hussein, a civil war begins in the country. The United States will stay in Iraq until 2011. And in 2014, the ISIS group will capture a third of Iraq, including the second largest city of Mosul. The area of the captured territories was comparable to the UK. They promised to overthrow the weak democratic government of Iraq and build a completely new state. But they bring only death and destruction. By 2017, they were pushed out of the territories they occupied. In 2017, these movements began to subside. But the country's economy could not recover after years of wars, conflicts, and bombings. These are the 20 years of Iraq after Saddam Hussein. Instability, destruction, protests. But how is the country's economy doing now, and what does it depend on? Let's move on to the next section. But first, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss interesting stories about other countries. The best way to support the channel is to like this video. Thank you. Awesome. Let's look at the GDP of Iraq today. It is $250 billion. Now, Iraq is home to 45 million people, and in 40 years, according to forecasts, the population is expected to double. The country is too populated to have an economy in the style of the Gulf states. At the same time, half of the population lives in poverty. Iraq's economy is still based on oil production and exports. Currently, the oil sector provides about 99.7% of the country's foreign exchange earnings. The main export commodities are crude oil, petroleum products, gold, natural gas, and fruit. Who buys all this, and on whom does Iraq depend? The main buyers are China, India, the United States, South Korea, and Greece. As I said, over the years of war and chaos, Iraq's economy has collapsed. Destroyed infrastructure, corruption, skyrocketing prices, unemployment, But in recent years, Iraq has been trying to get out of this situation. There are some positive factors. For example, since 2016, the unemployment rate has decreased from 16% to 9%. However, it is still difficult to do business in the country. Iraq ranks 172nd in the world in terms of ease of doing business. In 2022, Iraq earned a record $115 billion from oil. But this total dependence on one product can have extremely negative consequences if oil prices fall. This is always the downside of a commodity-based economy. Think of the case of Brazil. But how do ordinary Iraqis live in this situation? Let's move on to the next section. Undoubtedly, the large number of wars, the chaos of recent decades, and the war against ISIS have had significant impact on the internal state of Iraqis. However, they remain quite friendly and hospitable people. Just a few years ago, most of Iraq's territory was in military conflicts. Now, the major cities are calm and tourists are happy to visit them, because in some areas, it is much more comfortable than in Dubai. There are shopping centers, many women walk around without hijabs, a completely secular atmosphere. But in some areas, neither tourists nor foreigners are allowed, because they are still searching for militants hiding in the mountains. At the same time, there are completely safe areas, such as Iraqi Kurdistan. It is an autonomous region with its own government, army, and self-government. Kurdistan is quite a popular place for tourists because it is quite easy to get a visa there. Small business in Iraq is developing quite rapidly. You can find everything you need in the markets of Arab cities, starting from food, any services, and ending with almost any weapon. On the plus side, if you have your own apartment or house, you don't have to pay for it. There is no tax, but you have to buy electricity. On average, electricity can be available for 10 hours a day. Therefore, Iraqis have to buy generators to generate it. $150 a month is enough if you have a refrigerator, air conditioner, TV, and microwave at home. At the same time, many people earn $7 per hour. The average salary in Iraq is $450. But in spite of everything, Iraq remains a country with great potential. Oil, or black gold in Iraq's history, has long brought death and destruction instead of wealth. Perhaps in the near future, this situation will improve. What do you think? Write in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please click the like button. Thank you. See you soon.